If you ever tell my son what you saw tonight, I will make sure they never find your body." Evelyn Blackwell set down her wine glass, leaned across the table, and pressed one perfectly manicured finger into Nora's collarbone directly above her pregnant belly. Her voice never rose above a whisper. Her smile never left her face. And in that moment, Nora understood with absolute clarity that this dinner, this restaurant, this entire night had been engineered by one woman to destroy everything Nora had left. She was not Roman's wife tonight. She was a target, and the woman across from her had already pulled the trigger. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe, follow every single part until the end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Nora Blackwell had learned in the 3 years since she married into the most powerful criminal family in Chicago that there were certain rules a woman in her position was expected to follow without question. She was expected to dress well, but not too boldly, to speak warmly, but never too much, to ask nothing that Roman had not already volunteered, to smile at the right people, to look away from the wrong ones, to understand without being told that the word business was a door she was never meant to open, and that knocking on it would only remind everyone, including her husband, that she did not quite belong in the world she now lived in. She had followed those rules. For 3 years, she had followed them carefully, quietly, the way she had once followed lesson plans in the classroom, with intention, with patience, with the belief that structure would eventually lead somewhere good. But tonight, standing at the entrance of the Verity room in her cream dress, one hand resting lightly over the soft curve of her stomach, Nora realized something that no amount of careful rule-following could have prepared her for. The rules had never been made to protect her. They had been made to keep her still. She had not been planning to come tonight. Earlier that afternoon, she had been sitting in the reading chair by the window in their bedroom. The one Roman had moved from her old apartment because she told him once that it was the only place she felt truly quiet, and she had been reading a book about early childhood development, the kind of practical, grounded things she read now that her pregnancy was well into its 6th month. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Roman's driver, a man of few words who communicated mainly in short sentences and the specific way he held open car doors. "Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell asked me to bring you to dinner. The Verity room, 8 o'clock. She had stared at the message for a moment. Roman had not texted her himself. That was not unusual, not anymore. In the early months of their marriage, he had called her for every small thing, to say he was running late, to ask if she wanted anything, to tell her sometimes for no reason at all that he was thinking about her. Those calls had been her favorite part of the day, small and private, and entirely hers. But that was a different Roman. Or perhaps she had begun to think that was a Roman who had existed only in the brief window between falling in love and becoming fully swallowed again by the empire his family had built around him. Still, she dressed. She let Marcus drive her. She told herself that the dinner invitation meant something, that Roman was trying in his way to reach back across the distance that had grown between them since her pregnancy began. She wanted to believe it. She had been wanting to believe it for months. The Verity room was the kind of restaurant that required no sign above its door because the people who needed to know it existed already did. It occupied the entire top floor of a building in River North, its windows overlooking the city in every direction, its lighting calibrated to make everything feel slightly warmer, slightly more intimate, slightly more curated than the real world outside. Roman held 3 tables there on permanent reservation. Nora had been to the Verity room exactly 4 times in their marriage. Each occasion had been formal dinners with associates events tied to the legitimate side of the Blackwell name, the art gallery partnerships, and charitable foundations that served as the polished exterior of something much darker underneath. She had never been brought there for something private. As Marcus held open the car door and she stepped out into the cold December air, she felt the first small flutter of unease. Not panic, not suspicion, just the quiet way her body sometimes registered things before her mind was ready to name them. She walked inside anyway. The host at the entrance knew her on sight. He smiled with the practiced warmth of someone whose job depended on making every person feel expected. "Mrs. Blackwell, welcome. Your husband is already seated." She followed him through the restaurant, past tables of quiet conversation and crystal glasses, and the particular kind of laughter that belonged to people who had never once worried about a bill. The room was not crowded tonight. It rarely was on Wednesdays, and so the walk to Roman's table felt longer than it should have. She saw him before she was close enough for him to see her. He was at the corner table, the most private one, the one that sat slightly apart from the rest of the room, partially screened by a low partition of frosted glass that gave it the quality of its own small world. He was not alone. The woman sitting across from him was tall and polished in the particular way that belonged to people whose appearance was part of their professional currency. Her dark hair fell perfectly over one shoulder. Her dress was the color of deep wine. She was laughing not the social laugh of a business dinner, but something smaller and more private, the laugh of someone who felt entirely comfortable with the person across from her. Roman's hand was on the table. The woman's hand was near it, not touching, but near. And Roman, who had spent the last 4 months barely meeting Nora's eyes across their own dinner table at home, was leaning slightly forward, the way he used to lean toward Nora in the early days, the posture that meant he was actually there, actually present, actually paying attention to the person in front of him. Nora stopped walking. The host a step ahead of her turned back with a polished smile. "Mrs. Blackwell, is everything?" "I'm fine," she said. Her voice surprised her. It came out steady low, without any of the sharp edges she might have expected, because the thing she was feeling in that moment was not what she had always assumed betrayal would feel like. She had imagined, in the abstract way, that people imagine worst-case scenarios they do not truly believe will happen, that a moment like this would feel like fire, like something hot and immediate and ungovernable. Instead, it felt like the ground had simply stopped being there. Not an explosion, a disappearance. She did not go to the table. She stood where she was just long enough to understand exactly what she was seeing, and then she turned around and walked back through the restaurant toward the exit. Her heels were quiet on the floor. No one looked at her. The host said something behind her, but she did not register what it was. Outside, the December air hit her like a hand pressed flat against her chest. She breathed through it. Marcus was still with the car. He looked up when he saw her come out, and something shifted in his expression, something professional and controlled, but beneath it, something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. "Mrs. Blackwell." "Take me home," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He did not ask questions. She did not give him the chance. In the car, she sat with her hands folded over her stomach, and she looked out the window at the city sliding past, and she thought about a question she had never allowed herself to ask directly until now. How long had she known? Not about Jade. She did not know the woman's name yet, though she would learn it eventually because knowledge in Roman's world always arrived whether you wanted it or not. But about the shape of what her marriage had become. About the particular loneliness of being a woman who was protected and admired and never truly seen. About the slow, careful way Roman's presence in her life had been replaced by proxies, Marcus driving her, Lena managing her schedule, guards standing outside rooms that Roman no longer entered. She had told herself again and again that it was the business, that the pressure of what Roman carried was enormous, and that love, real love, did not evaporate just because it became less visible. She had told herself that the baby would change things. She had told herself a great many things. Sitting in the back of that car, moving through the cold Chicago night with one hand on her stomach and the city lights blurring past the window, Nora Blackwell finally stopped telling herself anything at all. And in the silence that followed, she began very quietly to think. The house was exactly as she had left it, which was to say, large and immaculate and entirely empty of Roman. He had not been home before 9 on any night in the past 3 weeks. She had stopped tracking it consciously, but her body had kept count the way bodies do. She went upstairs. She did not turn on all the lights. She moved through the house the way she had learned to move through it efficiently, without expecting it to feel like anything in particular. In the bedroom, she sat at the edge of the bed for a long time without moving. She thought about the moment Roman had proposed to her. They had been in her apartment, the small one in Wicker Park she had before everything changed, and he had been sitting on her kitchen counter because he could never quite figure out what to do with himself in small spaces, and he had said without any ceremony at all, "I want to keep doing this forever. Will you let me?" She had laughed. She had said yes. She had believed him. She still believed that he had meant it, but meaning something and doing something where she had come to understand two very different things inside a family like the Blackwells. She reached for her phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it face down on the bed. She was not going to call him. Not tonight. Not to have the conversation she could already script entirely from memory, his voice carefully controlled. His explanation measured and reasonable. The word business appearing within the first 2 minutes. The silence that would follow when she asked for something he had already decided he could not give her. She was tired. Not the tiredness of pregnancy, though that was real and present in her body every day now. Something older than that. Something that had been building since long before tonight. She was tired of performing the role of a woman who believed everything was going to be all right. She got up. She went to the small writing desk in the corner of the room, the one that had been there when she moved in that had never quite matched the rest of the furniture because it had been hers before anything else was theirs. She sat down. She found paper. She found a pen, and she began to write. It was not a letter she had planned. She did not know what she was going to say when she started. She only knew that her hand was moving and that the words coming out were true in a way that felt both devastating and necessary, the way truth often feels when you have been carefully avoiding it for a very long time. She wrote about the night they met. She wrote about the library and the way he had folded himself onto the floor with a group of 7-year-olds without any embarrassment at all, and how that single moment had made her believe something about him that she had never quite been able to let go of, even when it became increasingly difficult to see. She wrote about the first time she understood what his family actually was. Not the version she had pieced together from rumors and carefully worded half-truths, but the actual unambiguous reality of it, the night she had overheard a conversation she was never supposed to hear, standing in the hallway outside his office, her hand raised to knock and frozen mid-air by the words coming through the door. She wrote about the way she had chosen to stay anyway, how that had been her decision made with clear eyes, how she had believed that love was worth the cost. She wrote about what the cost had actually been, and then finally, because the truth does not allow you to be careful when you have finally decided to tell it, she wrote about tonight. She did not accuse him of things she had not seen with her own eyes. That was not her style, and it had never been even in the classroom when children came to her with stories that had more holes than facts. She dealt in what was real, in what was demonstrable, in what could not be argued away with the right framing. What she had seen tonight was real. What she had felt in that restaurant, the total and complete understanding that she had been invited to a dinner that was designed to show her something, that she had been maneuvered into a specific place at a specific time, that was real too. She did not yet know who had designed it, but she was not naive, and she had spent 3 years in a world where nothing happened by accident. She wrote, "I don't know who put this in motion, but I know that you let the world around you become one where this was possible. And that is the part that belongs to you." She wrote, "I am not leaving because of tonight. I am leaving because tonight was only the last night in a very long series of nights where I understood more and more clearly that I had been loved but never truly protected. And inside your world, the difference between those two things is everything." She wrote, "Do not look for me in the places you have people watching. I know all of them." She wrote, "The baby is healthy. I will be careful. That is all I am willing to tell you." And then, at the bottom of the page, in the careful handwriting she had spent years developing, because she believed that the way a person wrote said something about the way they thought, "If you wanted a wife who stays silent, you chose wrong. I learned how to leave." She put the letter in an envelope. She sealed it. She wrote his name on the front, just Roman, nothing else, because he had always been in her private understanding of things, just Roman before he was anything else. She left it on the pillow on his side of the bed, and then she went to the closet. She had packed before, not for this, or not consciously for this, but she had learned in the way that people who live near the edge of dangerous things learn to always have what she called her quiet bag, a single small bag tucked behind her winter coats, containing the things she would genuinely need if she ever had to move without warning. Identification, a prepaid card, cash in 2 different currencies, the number of a person whose existence Roman did not know about. A second phone, cheap and untraceable, that she had purchased herself in a pharmacy in a neighborhood that did not appear on any itinerary Marcus had ever driven her to. Her doctor had told her at her last appointment that she should be careful about stress in the third trimester, that elevated cortisol levels were not good for fetal development, that she should try to rest more. She had nodded and thanked him. Now she zipped the bag. She picked up her wedding ring and held it for a moment. It was a beautiful ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious things that decorated the hands of other women in Roman's world. He had picked it himself, which had surprised her because she had expected something designed to signal wealth, and instead received something that looked like it had been chosen because it was right for her specifically. She set it on the nightstand. She looked at the room one last time, at the reading chair by the window, at the bookshelf she had filled slowly with the kinds of books that Roman claimed he would read and never did. At the photograph on the dresser, their wedding day, a quiet courthouse ceremony with 4 people present, which was exactly what she had wanted, which he had given her without a word of protest. She did not let herself feel all of it at once. She had learned that too in the last 3 years. You feel what you can afford to feel in the moment you are in, and you carry the rest forward. She was out of the house by 11:15. Marcus was not there. She had made certain of that before she came downstairs. The guards at the gate were positioned, as always, to monitor who came in, with considerably less attention paid to who left. Roman's world was built around the assumption that the people inside it wanted to stay there. That assumption had always been his most significant miscalculation. The street outside was cold and dark and entirely ordinary, which was the only kind of street she needed it to be. She walked 2 blocks before she took out the cheap phone and made a single call. The person on the other end answered on the second ring. She said, "I'm ready." The voice on the other end said, "I know. I've been watching the building. I saw the lights in your room." She almost smiled. "How long do we have?" "He'll know something is wrong by morning. If you're not where they can find you in the next 4 hours, it gets significantly harder for them." "Then we move now." "The car is on Wabash. Blue Honda. Keys are under the left rear tire." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," the voice said. "Just walk." So she walked, pregnant, alone, with a letter on a pillow and a ring on a nightstand, and 3 years of a life she was leaving behind in the most powerful, most dangerous city in the Midwest. She walked, and for the first time in longer than she could properly remember, each step she took belonged entirely to her. Roman Blackwell came home at 12:47 in the morning. He was not drunk. Roman was almost never drunk. He had learned from watching his father that intoxication was a luxury the powerful could rarely afford, because it was precisely in those soft, unguarded moments that empires cracked. He was tired and tense, in the way he was always tense after an evening that had not gone the way he intended. The dinner tonight had been his mother's suggestion. He understood that now, standing in the doorway of his own bedroom, looking at the undisturbed surface of the bed at the nightstand at the ring, he understood with the specific and horrible clarity that comes when all the pieces of something land at once, that he had been managed. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He picked up the ring. He set it down. He looked at the envelope on the pillow. His name, her handwriting. He sat on the edge of the bed and he held the envelope for a long time without opening it, the way a person holds something they already know will change them before they are fully ready to be changed. Then he opened it. He read it once quickly, the way he processed most information, scanning for facts, for the operational details, for the actionable parts. Then he read it again, slowly. And somewhere around the 3rd sentence of the second, read Roman Blackwell, who had not cried since he was 11 years old, and had taught himself through sheer determined repetition to treat grief the way he treated every other tactical problem, with containment, with strategy, with forward movement, felt something in his chest that had no tactical solution at all. He sat with it. The room was very quiet. Outside Chicago went on being Chicago, vast and cold and entirely indifferent to the specific weight of what one man was carrying in one room, in one house, at the far edge of midnight. He read the letter a 3rd time. He set it down. He picked up his phone. He looked at it. Then he looked at the letter again. I learned how to leave. He thought about the school library. the way she had looked at him from across a row of picture books, with no fear at all. Not the practiced fearlessness of someone performing courage, but the genuine natural kind that came from a person who simply had not built her world around the things he was used to people wanting from him. He thought about the kitchen counter in her apartment, the laugh she had when something surprised her, the way she had said yes. He thought about the last 4 months, about the dinners he had missed, about the appointments he had canceled, about the specific evening 3 weeks ago when she had said very quietly, standing in the kitchen doorway, "I just want you to be here sometimes." And he had said, "I know," and then left anyway. He pressed a button on his phone. "Marcus?" "Sir?" Marcus answered on the first ring, which told Roman that Marcus had been awake and waiting. "Where is she?" Silence. Not the silence of a man who did not know the answer, the silence of a man deciding how to deliver it. "We don't know," Marcus said. 3 words. Roman had built an empire on information, on knowing at any given moment exactly where every significant piece was on the board. He had surveillance on 6 city blocks in every direction from this house. He had people in positions throughout Chicago who reported directly to him. He had resources that could find anyone in any city within hours. "What do you mean?" Roman said. "You don't know." "She left on foot," Marcus said. "Approximately 2 hours ago. She passed the Wabash camera and then she was gone. We pulled the footage. She took a blue Honda Civic registered to a name we don't have on file. We're running it now." "How did she know the camera on Wabash?" Another silence. "We're working on that, sir." Roman looked at the ring on the nightstand, at the letter in his hand. "She planned this," he said, not a question. "It appears so. Sir, she didn't bring anyone. She did this alone." Roman said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Find her." "Yes, sir, and your mother has been calling. She says, 'I'll call my mother when I find my wife,'" Roman said, and he hung up. He stood. He went to the window and he looked out at the city, his city, the one his family had built and controlled and held through 2 generations of calculated brutality and strategic loyalty, and he felt for the first time what it was like to look at it from the inside of something that was slipping away from him. His power had a shape. He had always known its edges, its borders, the places it reached and the places it did not. He had never counted his own bedroom among the places it did not reach. He was wrong about that. He was wrong, he was beginning to understand with growing cold certainty about several things. He read the letter one more time. The last line. "If you wanted a wife who stays silent, you chose wrong." He folded it carefully. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket against his chest where he kept the things he could not afford to lose. And then Roman Blackwell began the longest night of his life, not because of the search, which would involve 36 people and 10 times as many resources, not because of the calls he would have to make or the questions he would have to answer, but because of the simple, devastating, irreversible fact that somewhere in the city he controlled his pregnant wife was alone in the dark. And it was his fault. Not entirely his, but enough, more than enough. Roman did not sleep that night. He sat at his desk in the study with the letter in front of him and his phone in his hand, and he worked the way he always worked, when something needed to be found systematically, without emotion, moving from one resource to the next, with the kind of deliberate precision that had kept him alive and in power for 15 years. Except that every 15 minutes or so, he would stop and read one line of the letter again, and then put it face down and pick up his phone again. By 3 in the morning, he had 12 people actively searching. By 4, he had pulled every traffic camera on the south and west sides. By 5, he knew the blue Honda had been registered to a woman named Carol Sims, a retired school teacher from Evanston who had died 4 years ago, which meant the registration was a ghost, which meant Nora had built this exit with a level of planning and detail that he was only now beginning to fully appreciate. He stared at the name Carol Sims for a long time. Then he called his head of operations, a man named Donovan, who had been with the Blackwell family for 22 years and who communicated primarily in clipped sentences and absolute reliability. "The registration is a dead woman," Roman said. "I saw it," Donovan said. "Someone built her a clean exit, boss. This wasn't improvised." "How long?" "The registration was created 8 months ago." 8 months. Roman sat with that. 8 months ago, Nora had been 4 months pregnant, still coming to dinner every night, still asking him quiet questions about his day that he answered with less and less each time. 8 months ago, she had been sitting across from him at their kitchen table, and somewhere underneath that stillness, she had already begun building the door. "Who helped her?" Roman said. "We're working on it." "Work faster." He hung up. He looked at the letter again. "I know all of them." She had written that referring to the places he had people watching, which meant she had spent months mapping his surveillance, which meant she had been paying attention in a way he had completely failed to anticipate because he had made the same mistake that powerful men so often make with quiet women. He had assumed that her stillness was passivity. He had confused her patience with acceptance. He had been wrong about nearly everything. The realization settled into him slowly, the way cold does not all at once but incrementally working its way through layer after layer until it reached something central and irreversible. At 5:47 in the morning, his phone rang. It was his mother. He let it ring 4 times before he answered. "Roman." Evelyn Blackwell's voice was precisely calibrated, warm enough to suggest maternal concern, controlled enough to remind you who you were speaking to. "I heard about Nora. I want you to know I'm here if you need—" "Did you know she was going to leave?" Roman said. A pause, very brief, the kind that most people would not catch. "Of course not. Why would I—" "Who was Jade?" Another pause, longer this time. "She's a business associate of Lorenzo's. She was at the restaurant because—" "Mother." His voice dropped. Not louder, quieter. In the Blackwell family, the truly dangerous register was always the quiet one. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to think carefully about how you answer." Evelyn said nothing. "Did you arrange last night?" The silence stretched for 4 full seconds. Roman counted. "I arranged a dinner," Evelyn said finally. "I thought it was time Nora understood certain realities about your world, about what this family requires. She was becoming—" "Stop. Roman, she was never right for." "I said stop." He stood up from the desk. His hand was very steady on the phone, which surprised some part of him. He had expected rage. What he felt instead was something colder and more precise. "You had my pregnant wife walk into a staged scene in a restaurant full of my associates at 8 months pregnant. I was protecting the family." "You were protecting your control," he said. "There's a difference. I've spent 15 years pretending I can't see it. That's done. Roman, you need to calm down and think about what—" "Find something else to do with your morning," he said. "Don't call me again until I call you." He hung up. He stood in the middle of the study and breathed for a moment, just breathed, which was something he had read once in a book. Nora had left on the nightstand was the most underestimated form of self-regulation available to human beings. He picked up his phone again. "Donovan, new priority. I want everything we have on my mother's movements over the last 3 months. Every meeting. Every call she made that didn't go through the main line. Every favor she called in." Donovan was quiet for exactly 1 second. In 22 years, he had never been asked to surveil a Blackwell. "Yes, sir," he said. "And Donovan. If anyone on my team had any knowledge of last night before it happened, I want names." "Understood." Roman sat back down. He put the letter in front of him again. He read it from the beginning one more time, and this time he did not read it for information. He read it the way you read something that someone wrote for you specifically for the texture of it, for the things underneath the words, for the places where the pen had pressed harder into the paper. There was one paragraph that he kept returning to. "You used to sit on the floor with children you had never met in a library that had nothing to do with your world because a woman you barely knew asked you to. That was the man I married. I have spent 3 years looking for him and finding instead only the man your family made you. I am not angry, I am only tired, and I am done being tired in a house where the exhaustion is never allowed to matter." He read it 3 times. Then he set the letter down, and he picked up his phone, and he called the one person in his life who had never once told him what he wanted to hear. Father Cahill, 71 years old, a Jesuit priest who had known Roman's father and who had baptized Roman and who had sat across from Roman in a confessional 16 years ago and told him with complete directness that the life he was choosing would cost him things he could not yet imagine losing. The phone rang 5 times, then the old man's voice rough with sleep. "Roman, it's 6 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry." A pause. Then, with the particular alertness of someone who understood what a 6 a.m. call from Roman Blackwell actually meant, what happened? Nora left. Silence. "The baby, she says they're both safe. I believe her. And you're calling me because you're the only person I know who will tell me the truth about whether this is my fault." Father Cahill was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler, but not soft. The man had never done soft. "Is there any part of you that already knows the answer to that question?" Roman looked at the letter. "Yes," he said. "Then you don't need me to tell you," Father Cahill said. "You need to decide what you're going to do about it. I need to find her first." "No," the old priest said with surprising firmness. "You need to become someone worth finding first. In that order, Roman, not the other way around." Roman said nothing. "You still there?" "I'm here." "She's smart," Father Cahill said. "Smarter than you probably in the ways that matter most. If she ran, she had her reasons. And if she's safe, then the first thing you owe her is not a search party. It's an honest accounting of how things got to this point." "I can do both." "You can try," the priest said. "But I know you, Roman. When you go into operational mode, you stop feeling things. And right now, feeling things is the only useful thing you can do." Roman stared at the window. The city was beginning to lighten. The particular gray-blue of a Chicago winter morning, the sky not yet decided between night and day. "She planned this for 8 months," he said quietly. "She was sitting at dinner with me, looking at me, and she had already built the exit. And what does that tell you? That she gave me 8 months to change, and I didn't." Father Cahill let the silence hold for a moment. "Get some sleep, Roman. Then call me when you're ready to talk like a man instead of a general." He hung up. Roman set the phone down. He did not sleep. Instead, he opened the desk drawer and took out the photograph he kept there. Not a formal one, not the kind that lived in frames. This was a photograph from a Saturday afternoon 2 years ago in her old neighborhood before they had moved into the Blackwell house. She was standing outside a bookshop with a bag of books over one shoulder, and she was laughing at something out of frame, and her hair was slightly windblown, and she looked absolutely, completely, undeniably like someone in the middle of her own life, not a supporting character in someone else's, but the main character in her own. He had taken the photograph. He had been standing 6 feet away with her coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, and she had not known he was taking it. And when she saw it later, she had said, "I look like a mess." And he had said, "You look like yourself." And she had gone quiet, in the particular way she went quiet when something moved her. He set the photograph next to the letter, looked at them both. He was very still for a long time. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Donovan. "We found something. You need to see this." Roman was out of his chair before he finished reading the sentence. The operations room was 2 floors below the study, a room that did not appear on any official floor plan of the house, with 4 screens and a secure line and a coffee maker that Donovan kept running 24 hours a day on the grounds that the work never stopped and neither should the caffeine. Donovan was standing at the main screen when Roman came in. There were 2 other men in the room, both of whom Roman trusted, which was a category that had narrowed considerably in the last 6 hours. "Talk," Roman said. Donovan pointed at the screen. 8 months ago, your mother began a series of meetings with a man named Garrett Cole. He's a fixer, not one of ours, independent operator, very clean, very expensive, very good at building narratives." "What kind of narratives?" "The kind that look like reality." Donovan pulled up another screen. Garrett Cole was paid through 3 different shell accounts to locate and position a woman named Jade Mercer. Model, clean record. No connection to anyone in our organization or any competing family. She was specifically selected because she had a documented prior relationship with a man in your business circle, which meant her presence at a dinner with you would read as natural. Roman was very still. "Garrett Cole also," Donovan continued, "arranged the business meeting that kept you in that room until 8:15. The call that pulled you in at 7:45 from Lorenzo, we traced it. Lorenzo made the call because he was told it was urgent. He wasn't told why. He wasn't part of it. My mother built a set, Roman said. Yes, sir. She built a set with my wife as the audience. Yes. And my wife? Roman stopped. He looked at the screen. My wife knew. Donovan looked at him carefully. What makes you say that? Because she left that same night. She didn't wait. She didn't call me. She didn't confront me. Roman turned away from the screen. She recognized it for what it was. She saw the setup, and she didn't fall into the trap of it. She used it as the final confirmation of something she had already decided. The room was quiet. She'd been watching my mother for months, Roman said. That's why she knew the camera positions. She wasn't mapping my surveillance. She was mapping my mother's. Donovan said nothing. Roman turned back. His voice was absolutely level. Pull every interaction between Garrett Cole and my mother's personal staff. I want to know who in this house was feeding information to her operation. Someone was telling her when Nora's schedule would bring her to that restaurant. Someone was managing the timing. Yes, sir. And Donovan. Roman picked up his coffee from the corner of the desk. The woman, Jade Mercer. Where is she now? We located her this morning. She's at a hotel in the Loop. She hasn't left since last night. Bring her in. Quietly. I want to talk to her. Understood. Roman went back upstairs. He showered. He changed. He ate something he could not have said. What, because he had learned long ago that the body's needs did not pause for emotional emergencies, and that ignoring them created additional problems. At 9:45 in the morning, Jade Mercer was brought into the sitting room off the main entrance. She was composed, which told Roman she had been expecting this. She sat straight, hands folded, dressed simply, and when he came into the room, she met his eyes directly without looking away, which told him something else, that she was either genuinely brave or had been told something to make her feel protected. You know who I am, Roman said. He did not sit. Yes. You know why you're here. I think so. Then let's skip the part where I ask questions, and you decide how much to say. He looked at her steadily. Tell me everything you know about the woman who hired Garrett Cole. Jade was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands, then up at him. She told me it was a test, she said. For your wife. She said she needed to know if your wife could handle the pressures of your world, that it was a loyalty assessment. I thought... She stopped. I know how that sounds. Keep going. She told me to sit at your table. To be warm, to make it look like we had a history. She said your wife would be brought in at a specific time, and that after she saw us together, someone would explain to her privately that it was a test and that she had passed. Jade's jaw tightened. I didn't know there was no plan to explain anything. I didn't know your wife was pregnant. I wasn't told that part. Roman looked at her for a long moment. She used you, he said. Yes. And you let yourself be used. I needed the money, Jade said quietly. That doesn't make it right, but it's the truth. Roman nodded slowly. I'm going to need a signed statement. Everything you just told me in writing with dates and amounts. And then you're going to leave Chicago, he said, and not come back for a while. Not because I'm threatening you, but because my mother will understand very quickly that you talked to me and she is significantly less reasonable than I am. Jade looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not relief exactly, but a kind of recalibration. Okay, she said. Donovan will take your statement. He left the room. In the hallway, he stood for a moment with one hand pressed flat against the wall. He breathed. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone that morning, the half-second pause before she answered his questions, the practiced warmth. He thought about 8 months of Nora sitting across from him at the dinner table, building an exit, watching his mother's operation with the quiet, methodical attention of a woman who had decided that understanding was more useful than confrontation. He thought about the letter. I am not angry. I am only tired. He pulled out his phone. He had 14 missed calls from various people in his organization, 3 from associates, 2 from his lawyers. He scrolled past all of them. He opened his messages. He found Nora's contact. He stared at it for a long time. He typed, I know what happened last night. I know who built it. I'm sorry it took me this long to see clearly. He stared at the message. He did not send it. Because Father Cahill was right, and Roman, for all his faults, had never been a man who lied to himself when the truth was sitting directly in front of him. Sending a message was operational. It was Roman, the general, managing a situation, opening a negotiation. It was not what she needed from him. It was not, if he was being fully honest, what he needed to do. What she needed, what he owed her, was something that could not be delivered in a text message at 10 in the morning while her location was still unknown, and his operations team was running her license plate, and his mother was sitting in her house on the north side, waiting to see what her son would do next. He deleted the message. He put the phone in his pocket. He went back to the operations room. Any movement on the vehicle? Last confirmed sighting was on I-90 eastbound at approximately midnight 40, Donovan said. After that, nothing. She either switched cars or went to a location without camera coverage. She switched cars, Roman said. She's too careful not to. Then we're looking at a secondary vehicle we don't have any information on. Whoever helped her had access to resources we haven't mapped. Roman thought about that. He thought about the ghost registration 8 months ago. About the second phone she had clearly been using that his team had never picked up. About the person she had called from the street because someone had told her which block the car was on, which meant someone had been in position, watching the house ready to move. She had a network, Roman said quietly. Someone built her a parallel network. Someone who knows how our operations work well enough to stay completely outside our visibility. Donovan nodded carefully. That's what it looks like. That means someone who used to be inside. The room was quiet. Roman looked at the screen. He thought about who in the last 3 years had left his organization on reasonable terms. Who might have had a reason to help Nora specifically? Who had the skills to build a clean exit and the motivation to do it? One name arrived in his mind before he had finished forming the question. He said it quietly. Donovan looked at him. Are you sure? No, Roman said. But find out. He walked out of the operations room, back up the stairs, through the house that was full of everything Nora had chosen and arranged and made habitable, past the reading chair by the window that still held the shape of where she had spent her evenings, into the kitchen, where her handwriting was still on the notepad next to the refrigerator from a grocery list she had made 4 days ago. Oranges, chamomile tea, the good bread from the bakery on Huron. A book she had been waiting for. She had written the title down so she would not forget it when she ordered. He looked at the list for a long time. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, the one they had eaten at together for 3 years, the one he had stopped coming home to, and he put his face in his hands. Not weeping. Roman did not weep, but something adjacent to it, something that had no name in the vocabulary of the world he had been raised in, where what you felt was always less important than what you decided. He sat there for 11 minutes. He counted because counting was what he did when he needed something to hold on to. Then he stood up. He straightened. He picked up his phone. He had a list of things to do. He had an operation to dismantle a mother, to confront a network, to map a woman to find, without her knowing she was being found. Because if she knew, she would move again, and she was better at this than he had any right to have underestimated. He had a great deal to do. But first he opened his contact list, found the number he was looking for, and called it. It rang 3 times. Then a voice, careful, slightly wary. Roman. I know you helped her, Roman said. I'm not calling about that. I'm calling because I need to know that she's all right. That's all. I don't need a location. I don't need anything operational. I just need to know that she and the baby are safe. A long silence. Then, she's safe. The baby is fine. She's not alone. Roman closed his eyes for 1 second. Thank you, he said. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen with the grocery list on the notepad and the reading chair in the next room, and the weight of everything he had built and broken distributed evenly across every part of him. Then he picked up his keys and he went to go dismantle the thing his mother had been building in the dark, because if he was going to become someone worth finding, the first step was destroying everything that had made him someone worth leaving. He drove to his mother's house without calling ahead. That was intentional. Evelyn Blackwell operated most effectively when she had time to prepare, to select her words, to arrange her posture, to construct the precise version of reality she wanted you to walk into. Roman had watched her do it, his entire life, had admired it, once had spent years learning from it, and was now at 10:47 on a Thursday morning, using that knowledge against her for the first time. The guard at her front gate saw Roman's car and opened it immediately. Of course he did. Roman was still the head of the family, at least in every way that the people around him could measure. What had shifted was interior, the particular realignment that happens when a man stops seeing the world through the framework he was handed and starts seeing it as it actually is. He walked into the house without knocking. Evelyn was in the sitting room. She was dressed, which meant she had been expecting him, just not this soon. She had a cup of tea in front of her, and the particular composed expression she wore when she was managing something she considered beneath her full attention. "Roman," she said, "sit down. Let me have Elena bring you—" "I spoke to Jade Mercer this morning," Roman said. Evelyn's cup paused halfway to her mouth, just for a moment. Then she set it down with perfect steadiness. "I don't know who my mother." He looked at her directly. "We are not doing that. Not today." She was quiet. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly. Evelyn Blackwell had long ago restructured her relationship with guilt into something more functional. What moved behind her eyes was calculation. She was deciding how much he knew. She was measuring the distance between what she could still deny and what was already undeniable. "Jade Mercer gave me a signed statement," Roman said. "Garrett Cole's financial records are being pulled as we speak. I have the shell accounts. I have the meeting logs. I have the call records from the night you arranged to have Lorenzo pull me into that meeting." He sat down across from her, not because he wanted to sit, but because sitting meant he was staying, and he needed her to understand that he was not leaving until this was finished. "What I want from you right now is not an explanation. I want the truth, the full version, starting from when you decided that my wife needed to be removed." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she straightened, and when she spoke, her voice was not apologetic. It was the voice of a woman who had decided that if the wall was coming down, she would at least control how it fell. 6 months after the wedding, she said. That's when I knew. Roman said nothing. She was asking questions, Evelyn continued. Not the questions a wife asks, the questions an investigator asks. She wanted to understand the structure of the business. She wanted to know which properties were legitimate and which were not. She asked me once very politely about the Meridian account, and Roman, no one outside this family knows that account exists. Roman felt something cold move through him. She never told you, Evelyn said, watching his face. Of course she didn't, because she was collecting information. I don't know what she planned to do with it. I don't know if she was going to use it against us or simply use it to protect herself. But a woman who maps an empire from the inside while smiling across the dinner table is not a woman who loves you. She is a woman with an agenda. Or, Roman said very quietly, she is a woman who understood that she was living inside something dangerous and was making sure she could survive it, on her own terms. Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. You built a trap for a pregnant woman, Roman said. Because she was paying attention, because she was smart enough to understand where she actually was. He leaned forward. You didn't push her out because she was a threat to the family. You pushed her out because she was a threat to your control of me. And you were right. She was. Roman, the Meridian account. He watched her. Did you tell anyone outside this family that she had asked about it? The pause was less than a second, but Roman had been reading his mother's silences since he was 4 years old. Who did you tell? He said. I was protecting who did you tell? Evelyn set her teacup down with a precision that meant she was controlling something she did not want him to see. Vincent Caruso asked me 6 months ago whether your household was stable. I told him there were concerns. The room went very still. Vincent Caruso was the head of the second most powerful family in Chicago. He and Roman maintained a careful, mutually profitable peace that had taken 4 years and considerable bloodshed to establish. It was a peace built entirely on the understanding that neither family's internal structure would be used as leverage against the other. You told Vincent Caruso that my marriage was unstable, Roman said. I told him there were concerns, Evelyn repeated. I did not give him specifics. You gave him enough. Roman stood up. You gave him a window. You handed the one man in this city who would benefit most from my distraction a reason to start watching for cracks. He looked at his mother, really looked at her the way he had stopped doing sometime in his teenage years, when looking directly at things had started to cost too much. How long have you been feeding him information? I have never. How long? The word landed like something physical. Evelyn looked at her hands. For the first time in Roman's memory, she looked something close to diminished. 3 conversations, she said. Over 8 months, nothing operational, nothing that put anyone at risk. Nothing that put anyone at risk, Roman repeated. He said it slowly, letting each word sit. Nora is alone somewhere in this city, 8 months pregnant, because the world around her became unsafe enough that running was the rational choice. And you want to tell me that nothing you did put anyone at risk? Evelyn said nothing. I want the exact dates and content of those 3 conversations, Roman said. In writing. From your personal recollection, not filtered through your lawyers, on my desk by this evening. Roman, if you think I'm going to document, you will, he said, because the alternative is that I document it myself using Cole's records and Jade's statement and whatever else Donovan pulls in the next 12 hours, and my version will be considerably less favorable to you than yours. He walked to the door. Roman. Her voice came from behind him, and for the first time in his life it had something in it he had never heard before. Not softness, not exactly, but something adjacent to fear. Are you going to tell Vincent that I spoke to him? Roman stopped at the door. He did not turn around. I'm going to handle Vincent, he said. I'm going to handle everything you've created. That's what I've always done. He paused. But we are not what we were, you and I. Understand that clearly. He left. In the car, he sat for 30 seconds before starting the engine. His hands were on the wheel. His mind was running the geometry of what he had just learned. Evelyn feeding Vincent. Vincent watching for instability. Nora gone the timing of all of it, and he was understanding with increasing and uncomfortable clarity that his wife's disappearance had created an opening in the city's power structure that someone was going to try to fill, which meant the clock was not just personal, it was operational. He called Donovan. Vincent Caruso, he said, I need his current movements, and I need to know if he's made any approaches to our people in the last 48 hours. A brief pause. I'll have something in 20 minutes. Make it 10. He started driving. Nora, meanwhile, was 214 miles from Chicago. She was sitting at a small table in a kitchen that was not hers, in a house that belonged to a woman named Ruth, 63 years old, former social worker, the kind of person who had spent 40 years helping other people disappear from dangerous situations, and had never once been thanked for it in a way that matched what the work actually cost her. Ruth had made tea. Nora had her hands around the mug, and she was staring at the table, and she was doing the thing she had gotten very good at in the last 3 years, processing quietly, without externalizing, holding the weight of something enormous inside a stillness that other people routinely mistook for calm. Your blood pressure is up, Ruth said. She had taken it twice already that morning. She kept a cuff in the kitchen drawer because this was not the first time someone had arrived at her door in a state that required monitoring. Not dangerously, but we need to watch it. I know, Nora said. The baby moved this morning. 3 times before I got out of bed. Good. Ruth sat across from her with her own mug. She was not a woman who filled silence unnecessarily. She let it sit for a moment. Then, you want to tell me what you're thinking, or do you need more time to figure it out first? Nora looked up from the table. I'm thinking about the letter. What about it? Whether I said the right things, whether I said too much or not enough. She paused. Whether he'll understand what I actually meant. Ruth looked at her steadily. Does it matter? For right now, does it matter whether he understands? Nora considered that honestly. Yes, she said. Not because I need him to come after me, but because I spent 3 years feeling invisible in that house, and the letter was the first time I said everything out loud. I need it to have landed. Letters always land, Ruth said. Whether people know what to do with them is a different question. Nora nodded slowly. She looked at the window, not at anything beyond it, just at the surface of it, the way light was doing what light does. "He's going to search," she said. "He's very good at finding things." "I know," Ruth said. "That's why we're not staying here more than 4 days." "Where next?" "I have a place in Michigan, small town, a doctor there who's delivered babies for 30 years and doesn't ask questions that aren't his to ask." Ruth wrapped both hands around her mug. "You'll be safe there until the baby comes. After that, we figure out the next part." Nora nodded. Then quietly, "He's not a bad man. I want to say that because I think sometimes people need to hear the complicated version. He is not a bad man. He is a man who was raised inside something that ate everything soft in him, and he let it because letting it was easier than fighting it, and fighting it would have required him to give up something he had been taught from the time he was a child was more valuable than anything he might lose." Ruth listened. "But I cannot be the person who waits for him to choose differently," Nora said. "I tried that. I tried it for 3 years, and what it cost me—" She stopped. Her hand moved to her stomach. "What it almost cost me was everything." Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over Nora's. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Nora's phone buzzed. Not the cheap one, the one she had brought from the house, which she had been using only to monitor, not to communicate. She looked at the screen. A notification. Not a call, not a text. Something from the news app she had never bothered to delete. The headline was, "Blackwell family associate Garrett Cole taken into federal custody for questioning." Nora stared at it. Then she looked up at Ruth. "He found Cole," she said. Ruth read the notification over her shoulder. "Fast." "He's always fast," Nora said. And there was something in her voice that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but held something of both. "He's taking apart what his mother built." "Is that good or bad for you?" Nora thought about it carefully. "It means he knows," she said. "He knows it was staged. He knows I didn't walk into a real betrayal." She set the phone down. "Which means the conversation I was afraid of is going to be more complicated than I thought." "Why complicated?" "Because if he knows it was a setup, he's going to believe that the reason I left was only about his mother, and it wasn't." She said it simply without drama. It was about everything that made a setup like that possible in the first place. It was about 4 months of sleeping in the same bed as someone who had already left. It was about calling his name in a house that had 7 people in it and feeling completely alone. She picked up her tea. His mother was the match, but Roman built the room that caught fire. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You're going to have to tell him that," she said. "At some point, you're going to have to say that to him directly." "I know," Nora said, "but not today." Back in Chicago, Donovan's 10 minutes had become 8. "Vincent made contact with 3 of our territory managers yesterday," Donovan said the moment Roman answered. "Not aggressive contact, social, the kind of outreach that says, 'I'm available if things change,' without ever saying it directly." "He's circling," Roman said. "Yes, sir. Set up a meeting. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. Private. I'll go to him." Roman was already thinking through the conversation, the precise balance of information and implication that would communicate without any direct accusation that he was aware of what Vincent knew and that the window Vincent thought he was watching had just closed. "And Donovan, make sure the Cole situation is visible. I want Vincent to know we moved on it before noon." "Already in motion." Roman paused. "Any movement on Nora?" "Nothing new. The trail ends at I-90. We're working secondary angles." "Keep working them. But Donovan, when we find her location, I want to know before anyone else in this organization. No action without my direct instruction. Clear." "Crystal clear, sir." He hung up. He was driving through the city, and he was thinking about what Nora had written, "I know all of them," and he was turning over the question that had been sitting at the edge of his mind since he read those words at 12:47 in the morning. She had known his surveillance positions. She had known his camera locations. She had known his operational patterns well enough to move through them without being caught. And she had built over 8 months a network capable of giving her a clean exit from the most monitored household in Chicago. That required help from someone who understood his world from the inside. He had said a name to Donovan earlier quietly, and Donovan had gone to check it. Now Roman pulled over. He called Donovan again. The name I gave you this morning. Yes, sir. We confirmed it 40 minutes ago. The car registration, the secondary phone account, the routing of the Evanston identity, all of it traces back to infrastructure he built while he was still with us. He modified it after he left, redirected it. Roman sat with that for a moment. The name belonged to a man called Daniel Reyes. He had been Roman's head of personal security for 3 years before leaving the organization 14 months ago. On grounds that Roman had never fully questioned a family situation, Daniel had said a need to step back from this kind of work. Roman had let him go with respect and a generous severance and the understanding that the door was open if he ever changed his mind. He had not changed his mind. Instead, he had spent 14 months building Nora an exit. When did he first make contact with her? Roman asked. Based on what we can reconstruct, approximately 11 months ago, 1 month after he left. Roman closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 11 months ago, Nora had been 3 months pregnant. The distance between them had been growing for weeks. And somewhere in that window, Daniel Reyes had decided on his own, without being asked, that the woman inside the Blackwell house needed a way out. He called me, Roman said quietly. Not to Donovan, to himself. This morning, when I asked if she was safe. He remembered the careful wariness in Daniel's voice. He had thought it was guilt. Now he understood it was something else entirely, the wariness of a man who had done something he believed was right and was waiting to see how it would be received. He told me she was safe. He didn't deny helping her. How do you want to handle it, sir? Roman thought about Daniel Reyes, about the 14 years he had worked with him before those final 3, about the fact that Daniel had watched Roman change, had watched the distance grow inside Roman's marriage with the specific visibility of someone who is present for the small moments, the daily texture of a life, in a way that even close friends rarely are. Nothing, Roman said. Donovan was quiet. He did what I should have done, Roman said. He made sure she was safe when I wasn't doing it. The words cost him something. He felt the cost of them precisely, which meant they were true. Leave him alone. He pulled back into traffic. He thought about Nora at a table somewhere, hands around a cup of something warm. The baby moving the way it moved. Now she had described it once in one of the last real conversations they had managed, as feeling like a small, determined knock from the inside, like someone reminding you they were there. He thought about the letter. He thought about what he was going to have to become before any of what came next was possible. At 2:15 in the afternoon, he walked into the office of the family's primary legal counsel, a woman named Sylvia Park, who had handled the Blackwell family's affairs for 11 years, and who had, in that time, seen enough to be surprised by almost nothing. Almost. She looked up from her desk when he came in. Roman, I was expecting your call, not... I need to restructure something, he said. He sat down across from her without waiting to be invited. The operational accounts, the ones tied to my personal holdings rather than the family entity. Sylvia studied him carefully. That's a significant undertaking. What specifically? I want to separate my assets from my mother's access, he said. Fully. Every account, every property, every instrument, where she currently has any form of authority or signatory right. I want it clean, and I want it done correctly. Sylvia was quiet for a moment. Roman, your mother has been co-signatory on several of those structures since your father... I know when it was established, Roman said. I'm asking you to undo it. She's going to fight this. I know. It will create significant tension within Sylvia. He looked at her directly. I am not asking for your analysis of the political cost. I am asking you if you can do it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. Yes, she said. I can do it. Start today. He left the office and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold December air. Around him, Chicago moved with its characteristic combination of urgency and indifference, the city that had made the Blackwell name, that had absorbed 2 generations of the family's money and violence and ambition without slowing down for any of it. He thought about a school library. A floor full of children. A woman with a stack of picture books who had looked at him like he was just a person, not powerful, not dangerous, not the heir to anything, just a person who needed to decide whether to sit down or keep standing. He had sat down. He had forgotten somewhere in the years since that sitting down had been a choice. that the man who made it was still in there underneath everything the Empire had built over him. He was going to need that man, because what came next was not going to be simple or fast or without cost, and the version of him that ran on power and strategy and controlled distance was not equipped for it. He started walking. He did not know where Nora was, but he knew for the first time since midnight exactly where he needed to go. He walked into Father Cahill's church at 3:20 in the afternoon. Not because he needed absolution. Roman had made his peace years ago with the fact that the things he had done existed outside the reach of any formal ceremony. But Father Cahill had a room behind the sacristy with 2 chairs and a small table and no surveillance of any kind, and Roman needed for the first time in as long as he could remember to be somewhere that his own organization could not hear him think. The old priest was there. He looked up when Roman came in, assessed the situation in the way that 71 years of watching people in crisis had equipped him to do, and said nothing. He simply pulled the second chair slightly closer to the table and sat back down in his own. Roman sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Roman said, "My mother has been feeding information about my household to Vincent Caruso." Father Cahill closed his eyes briefly. "How long?" 8 months, maybe longer. Caruso has been using it to position himself for an approach to my territory managers. He made contact with 3 of them yesterday. And Nora? My mother staged the dinner. The woman that set up all of it. She used a fixer named Cole and a model named Jade who didn't fully understand what she was being used for. Roman's hands were flat on the table. Nora figured it out. Not last night, she figured it out months ago. She just needed one final confirmation before she moved. Father Cahill was quiet for a moment. She's smarter than the situation she was placed in. Yes. And you're only understanding that now. Roman did not look away. Yes. The priest leaned forward. So, what is it you actually came here to say, Roman? Because you have people for the operational problems. You didn't drive across the city to tell me about Caruso. Roman looked at his hands. I called Daniel Reyes this morning. He helped her leave. Built her the exit, the documents, the network. 14 months of preparation. He paused. And when I found out, I told Donovan to leave him alone. Why? Because he did what I should have done. He saw that she wasn't safe, and he acted on it. Roman's voice stayed level, but something underneath it was not. I had the same visibility Daniel had. I lived in that house. I saw the distance growing. I told myself it was temporary, that the business would stabilize, that she understood. He stopped. She understood perfectly. That's why she left. Father Cahill said nothing, which was his most effective pastoral tool. She mapped my mother's operation, Roman said, from inside my house, alone, while pregnant. She built a parallel exit network without using a single resource I controlled. And she did all of it quietly, without confrontation, without giving me any indication that she had already made her decision. He finally looked up. What does a person have to feel like to do that? What level of alone does a person have to be? The priest let that sit in the room for a long moment. The kind of alone, Father Cahill said carefully, that comes from being surrounded by people and still having no one who is fully actually present with you. Roman absorbed that. She wrote that, he said, in the letter. Different words, same thing. Then she told you clearly. The old man leaned back. The question is what you do with being told. I'm restructuring the financial holdings, removing my mother's access. I have a meeting with Caruso tonight. Roman said it the way he always said operational items quickly moving forward. Then he caught himself. That's the part I know how to do. The other part. Say it, Father Cahill said. Roman was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to be what she needed, he said. I know how to find her. I know how to protect her. I know how to remove every threat that exists in this city. But she didn't leave because of threats. She left because of me, because of what I became inside the thing I was running. He looked at the priest. And I don't know if that's fixable. I don't know if I'm fixable in the way that matters. Father Cahill looked at him for a long time. The fact that you're asking the question, he said finally, is the first evidence that it might be. Roman said nothing. Go handle Caruso, the priest said. Come back tomorrow, and the day after. Keep coming back until you can sit in that chair without reaching for your phone every 4 minutes. He paused. That's the work, Roman. Everything else is just logistics. Roman stood. He straightened his jacket. He picked up his phone from the table. He looked at it for a second. Then he put it back down. He sat back down. Father Cahill said nothing, but something in his expression shifted very slightly, the way something shifts when a person does the harder thing instead of the easier one. They sat in the room behind the sacristy for 22 minutes without speaking. It was the most useful 22 minutes Roman Blackwell had spent in longer than he could accurately calculate. At 4:45, he left for the meeting with Caruso. Vincent Caruso was 61 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular quality common to men who had survived long enough in dangerous worlds to develop a kind of philosophical patience about power. He did not rush. He had learned over 4 decades that the city rearranged itself eventually, that what looked like a stable structure was always underneath in motion, and that the men who won were the ones who moved at exactly the right moment rather than earlier. He was seated at his private table at a restaurant he owned in the Gold Coast when Roman arrived at 5 on the dot. He looked up with an expression of genuine, if measured, warmth. "Roman, sit down. You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Roman said. He sat. He did not take off his coat. This was not a long dinner. "I heard about the situation with your wife," Caruso said. His voice was carefully modulated sympathy present, but not excessive, the tone of a man who wants you to feel seen without committing to anything. "I'm sorry. Family difficulties are—" "Vincent," Roman said it the same way he had said his mother's name that morning, quiet, final. "We've known each other for 4 years. I think we can skip the version of this conversation where we pretend we're here about anything other than what we're actually here about." Caruso studied him for a moment. Then he picked up his wine glass, considered it, set it down. "All right. My mother spoke to you 3 times over the past 8 months. She gave you an impression of instability in my household. You made contact with 3 of my territory managers yesterday." Roman kept his voice level and his eyes steady. "I want you to understand that I am not here to threaten you. I'm here because 4 years of a workable peace is worth something, and I would prefer to preserve it." Caruso was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your mother came to me. I didn't solicit the contact." "I know. And the conversation I had with your managers yesterday was social. Nothing was offered. Nothing was accepted." "I know that too." "Then what is it you actually want from this meeting, Roman?" Roman leaned forward slightly. "I want you to look at this situation with accurate information. My mother acted outside her authority and outside my knowledge. The instability she described is not what it appeared. I have had a difficult 48 hours, but the organization is intact. The accounts are secure, and anyone who told you otherwise was working from information that was specifically designed to distort your perception of where things stood." Caruso absorbed this. "And your wife is none of your concern," Roman said, not harshly, simply. Caruso looked at him for a long moment. Then something in the older man's expression shifted from the careful neutrality of a strategist to something slightly more human. "You know what I thought," Caruso said, "when Evelyn first reached out? Tell me. I thought, here is a woman who loves her son so much that she can't see she's destroying him." He picked up his wine glass. "That's not strategy, Roman. That's a mother who is terrified of losing her grip on the only thing she ever built that she actually cared about." He paused. "That doesn't make it right, but it should inform how you handle it." Roman sat with that. It was not information he expected from this meeting. "The managers," he said. "Are we finished there?" "We were never started," Caruso said. "You have my word." Roman nodded. He stood. "Thank you for the time, Vincent." "Roman!" The older man looked up at him. "Go find your wife. Everything else is furniture." Roman left. In the car, he sat for a moment in the cold with the engine running. "Go find your wife." He picked up his phone. He pulled up Donovan's number. Then he stopped. He thought about what Father Cahill had said, about the order of things, about what she needed from him before any search meant anything beyond one more exercise of power in a relationship that had already been suffocated by it. He put the phone down. He drove home. The house was exactly as it had been when he left it that morning, large, immaculate, entirely empty of her. Except that it was not entirely empty of her, and that was the thing he had not understood until now. She was everywhere in it. The books on the shelves she had arranged by color on the bottom 2 rows because she thought it looked friendlier. The grocery list on the notepad, the reading chair, the photograph on the dresser. The specific way the kitchen smelled of the chamomile tea she drank every evening in the 3rd trimester because her doctor said it helped her sleep. He had lived in this house with her for 2 years, and he had seen none of it. Or he had seen it the way you see furniture as context, as background, as the reliable setting of your life, rather than evidence of the person who was actively daily constructing something around you. He went to the reading chair. He sat in it. It was not comfortable for him, too small, angled wrong for his height. But he sat in it anyway because she had sat in it every night for 2 years, and he wanted even briefly to understand the view from where she had been. From the chair you could see the door, you could see the hallway, you could see if someone came home the exact moment they entered, and you could also see very clearly if they did not. He sat there for a long time. Meanwhile, 214 miles away, Nora's phone buzzed. Not the news app this time, a call. From a number she recognized, one of the 3 people who had it. She looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at the screen. "Take it in the other room," she said. "I'll make more tea." Nora answered as she walked down the short hallway. "Daniel," she said. "He knows." Daniel Reyes's voice was careful. "He identified me this morning. He told his operations team to leave me alone." Nora stopped walking. "He told them to leave you alone. His exact words, as I understand them, were that I did what he should have done." A pause. "I thought you should know." Nora sat on the edge of the bed in the small spare room. She looked at her hands. "He's not coming after you." "No." "Did he ask where I was?" "He asked if you were safe. He said he didn't need a location, just confirmation." Nora was quiet for a moment. Her free hand was on her stomach. "He read the letter," she said, not a question. "Multiple times from what I hear." She breathed, in through her nose, out slowly, the way her prenatal yoga instructor had taught her in what felt now like a different life on a Tuesday morning in a studio 2 blocks from the Blackwell house. "Daniel," she said, "is he different in the last 24 hours? Is he actually different, or is he in crisis management mode?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone who knew both people in this question well enough to take it seriously. "He went to see Father Cahill," Daniel said finally. "He sat there for 22 minutes. He left his phone on the table." Nora closed her eyes. She knew what that meant. She had heard Roman talk about Father Cahill enough times to understand that the priest was the one person he could not perform for the one relationship in his life that required him to arrive as he actually was. And she knew because she had watched Roman for 3 years that sitting somewhere for 22 minutes without his phone was not nothing. For Roman Blackwell, it was close to everything. "Thank you," she said. "Be careful, Nora. He's working multiple fronts, his mother Caruso, the organizational restructuring. He's moving fast." "He always moves fast," she said. "This time he's moving fast and sitting still at the same time," Daniel said. "That's new." She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed in the small room in the house that was not hers, and she thought about Roman sitting in Father Cahill's back room without his phone, and she felt something that she had been carefully, deliberately not feeling since she walked out of the Verity room 24 hours ago. Not hope, exactly. Something earlier than hope. The thing that has to exist before hope is responsible to feel. She put it somewhere careful and quiet inside her, and she went back to the kitchen. Ruth looked up from the tea. "Well," she said. "He's not who he was 48 hours ago," Nora said. Ruth considered that. "And is that enough?" "I don't know yet," Nora said honestly, "but it's something I didn't have yesterday." Ruth pushed a mug across the table. "Then we watch and we wait, and we don't go back until you're certain. Not almost certain, certain." Nora wrapped her hands around the mug. She nodded. She thought about the baby, about what it meant to bring a child into a world where the primary lesson was either that love was worth the cost of staying, or that love was worth the courage of leaving. About the fact that both things could be true. About the fact that the letter she had written was not a goodbye. She knew that now, sitting here with the distance between her and Chicago measured in miles and clarity both, the letter was a requirement, a list of what would have to be true before anything else could be. She had not written it as an ending. She had written it as a door. Whether Roman could walk through it was still at this point an open question, but he was moving toward it. That much at least was real. Back in Chicago at 7:53 in the evening, Evelyn Blackwell's lawyer called Roman's lawyer. The document Evelyn had delivered, the one Roman had required, the written account of her conversations with Caruso, arrived via courier at 8:15. Roman read it at the kitchen table. 3 conversations dates included content summarized in his mother's careful, strategic prose, which meant it was accurate in its facts and managed in its framing, which was the most truth he was likely to get from her voluntarily. He read it twice. He set it in the file Donovan had started. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the grocery list on the notepad. Oranges, chamomile tea, the good bread from the bakery on Huron. On impulse, and Roman Blackwell very rarely acted on impulse, which perhaps was itself part of the problem. He picked up his car keys. He drove to the bakery on Huron. It was 9 minutes away. The bakery was still open. It closed at 9, which he only knew because Nora had mentioned it once. He went inside. He bought the bread she had written on the list. He bought the chamomile tea. He bought the oranges from the display near the register. The woman at the counter looked at him, well-dressed man clearly hadn't slept buying tea and bread at 8:40 in the evening, and said nothing which he appreciated. He drove home. He put the groceries on the kitchen counter. He stood there looking at them for a moment, which he understood was objectively speaking an irrational thing to have done. She was not here. She would not see this. He had bought bread for a woman who was 200 miles away and had good reasons for being there. But something in the act of doing it, of walking into the place she would have walked into, of buying the things she had written down, of bringing them back to the house she had left, was the closest thing to a concrete action his helplessness currently had access to. He sat down at the kitchen table. He took out the letter. He read it one more time, the full letter from the beginning, every word. And then he took out a piece of paper and a pen. And for the first time in his adult life, Roman Blackwell began to write something that had no strategic purpose, no operational function, no intended outcome beyond the pure unmanaged act of saying what was true. He wrote for a long time. He crossed things out. He started over twice. He did not reach for the version of himself that handled difficult communications as problems to be solved. He reached instead for the version of himself that had sat on a library floor at the age of 34 because a woman he barely knew asked him to, and it had seemed in that moment like the most important thing he could possibly do. He reached for that man. He found him still there, buried under 15 years of everything the empire required, quieter than he used to be, more uncertain, more aware of his own damage, but present. Still present. When he finished, he read what he had written. It was not polished. It was not strategic. It did not make any promises he was not prepared to keep, which meant it was shorter than he might have liked. But it was true. Every word of it was completely uncomplicatedly true. He folded it. He wrote her name on the front. He did not know yet how to get it to her. He did not know where she was, or rather he did not know precisely, and the person who did know was not going to tell him, and Roman had decided with more difficulty than he would ever admit to anyone that this was correct and appropriate. So he put the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket, same place he kept hers. He would figure out the how. He always figured out the how. But tonight, he had done something more important than logistics. Tonight, Roman Blackwell had told the truth to a piece of paper in an empty kitchen, with a grocery list on the notepad and a reading chair in the next room, and a city full of everything he controlled and everything he had almost lost arranged around him like a lesson he had needed 37 years to be ready to learn. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling. Outside, Chicago went on being what it was, enormous and cold and indifferent to any one man's reckoning, moving through its December night with the particular energy of a city that does not slow down for anything. And somewhere in Michigan, in a small room in a house that belonged to a woman named Ruth Nora Blackwell, put one hand on her stomach and felt the baby turn a slow, deliberate movement like a small person getting comfortable, and she exhaled. And for just a moment, in two different places, two people who had once sat on a library floor together and believed that was the beginning of something were both separately learning the same thing, that the beginning had never stopped. It had only for a while been buried. And beginnings, if you are willing to do the work of uncovering them, have a way of surviving even the things that were built on top of them, even empires, even silence, even the long, costly distance between a person who needed to be seen and a man who had forgotten how to look. The letter Roman wrote that night stayed in his jacket pocket for 6 days, not because he forgot it was there. Roman forgot nothing. It stayed there because he was not yet ready to deliver it, and he had learned finally at 37 years old, in the most expensive classroom available to human beings, that timing was not always about strategy. Sometimes it was about being honest with yourself about what you had not yet finished becoming. He woke up on the second morning and went to Father Cahill. He went back on the third morning and the fourth, not always to talk. Sometimes they sat in that back room and drank bad coffee and said very little, and Roman was beginning to understand that this was not wasted time. It was in fact the opposite of wasted time. It was the only time in his day that was not being spent managing consequences. On the fourth morning, Father Cahill said, "You're going to have to make a decision about your mother." "I know," Roman said. "Not a business decision, a son decision." Roman looked at him. "What's the difference?" "The business decision protects your empire," the priest said. "The son decision decides what kind of man you want to be in relation to the person who made you. Those are two separate things. You've been treating them as one." Roman was quiet for a moment. "She endangered Nora. She fed information to Caruso. She spent 8 months systematically dismantling my marriage." "Yes. And you're suggesting I separate that from how I respond to her as her son?" "I'm suggesting you decide what you actually want," Father Cahill said. "Not what the situation demands. What you want. There's a version of this where you remove her from all operational authority and maintain a civil relationship because she is your mother, and you are not willing to lose that entirely. And there's a version where you cut the relationship cleanly because the damage is too foundational to work around. Both are defensible. But you have to choose based on what's true for you, not based on what looks appropriate from the outside. Roman sat with that for a long time. "She was afraid," he said finally. "Caruso told me that. She was afraid of losing her grip on the only thing she'd ever built." "That's true," Father Cahill said, "and it doesn't excuse what she did." "No," Roman agreed, "but it makes it human." He decided that morning on a version that was neither forgiveness nor severance, but something more complicated and more honest than either the kind of relationship that acknowledges damage without pretending it didn't happen, that maintains connection without allowing repetition. He would tell her when he was ready. He was not ready yet. On the 5th day, Donovan came to him with something new. "The secondary vehicle," Donovan said. "The one she switched to after the Honda. We found it." Roman looked up from his desk. "Abandoned at a park and ride in Gary, Indiana, 3 days ago. Someone picked her up from there in a vehicle registered to a woman named Ruth Calloway, retired Kalamazoo, Michigan." Donovan set a file on the desk. "We have an address." Roman looked at the file. He did not open it. Donovan watched him carefully. "Sir, how certain are we that she's safe?" "Daniel Reyes confirmed it again this morning. He's been in contact with the Calloway woman. Both mother and baby are healthy. No complications." Roman nodded slowly. He looked at the file for a long moment. Then he slid it to the side of the desk without opening it. "Thank you, Donovan." Donovan blinked. "Sir, we have the address." "I know. You're not—" "Not yet," Roman said. "When I go to her, it will be because she's ready for me to, not because I found her." He looked up. "Keep the file. Keep monitoring for safety. The moment anything looks medically or physically concerning, I want to know immediately. But we are not moving on this location." Donovan was quiet for a moment. In 22 years, he had received many unusual instructions from Roman Blackwell. This was the most unusual. "Understood," he said. He left the office. Roman sat alone. He pulled out the letter from his jacket pocket. He unfolded it and read it one more time, His own words rough in places, honest in all of them. He thought about whether it was ready, whether he was ready. He thought about what Nora had written. If you wanted a wife who stays silent, you chose wrong. I learned how to leave. And he thought about the other things she had written, the line he kept returning to, because it was the most precise and most devastating thing anyone had ever said to him in direct relation to himself. You used to sit on the floor with children you had never met because a woman you barely knew asked you to. That was the man I married. He folded the letter, put it back in his pocket. He picked up his phone and called Daniel Reyes. Daniel answered on the second ring with the careful neutrality he had maintained throughout every interaction since this began. Roman, I need you to do something for me, Roman said, and I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to betray her location or compromise anything you've built for her. What I'm asking is completely separate from that. A pause. I'm listening. Tell her. Roman stopped. He started again. Tell her that I have a letter. Tell her it's not a negotiation and it's not a plan. Tell her that when she's ready, I'd like the chance to give it to her in person, not before she's ready, on her timeline. She chooses the place. He paused. Can you tell her that... Silence on the line. Roman could hear Daniel breathing the measured breath of someone deciding something. I can tell her that, Daniel said. Thank you. He hung up. He stood at the window, and he looked at Chicago, and he let himself feel the full weight of not knowing what she would decide, not knowing if the letter was enough, not knowing if he had moved far enough in the right direction for any of it to matter. He let himself feel it without reaching for a solution, which was the hardest thing he had done in 37 years, harder than anything the Empire had ever asked of him. He stood there for a long time. In Michigan, Daniel's call came through to Ruth's house at 11:40 in the morning. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table with a prenatal checkup scheduled for 2 o'clock. Dr. Harmon the Kalamazoo. OB. Ruth had spoken of 30 years of practice and a manner so unhurried it bordered on meditative. The baby had been active all morning. Nora had been tracking movements in the notebook she kept a habit. Her original OB had encouraged something concrete and measurable to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. She answered Daniel's call. She listened. She did not speak for a moment after he finished. He didn't open the file, she said. You're telling me Donovan brought him an address, and he didn't open it. That's what I'm telling you, Daniel said. Nora set down her pen. She looked at the notebook. At the small, careful marks she had made all morning, one for each movement, 23 since 7 a.m. All of them healthy, all of them right on schedule. He wants to give me a letter, she said. In person, when you're ready, your timeline, your location. She was quiet for a long time. Ruth came into the kitchen, read the situation in Nora's expression with the accuracy of a woman who had spent 40 years doing exactly this and silently put the kettle on. Daniel, Nora said finally, when you left the organization, why did you come to me? You didn't have to. You could have walked away entirely. A long pause. Because I watched what was happening for 3 years, Daniel said. I watched you try. I watched you make yourself smaller and quieter and more patient, and none of it changed the direction things were moving. And one day I was standing outside Roman's office, and I heard you in the kitchen asking him to just be there, just be present. And I heard him say, I know, and leave anyway. And I thought... He stopped. I thought someone has to do something, and I was the one standing there. Nora pressed her lips together. She breathed. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Don't thank me. Just be okay. She hung up. Ruth set tea in front of her without a word. Nora wrapped her hands around the mug. He has a letter. I heard. He didn't open the file with my address. Ruth sat down across from her. What does that mean to you? Nora thought about it carefully. Not the way she wanted it to mean something. She had spent too many years wanting things to mean something they didn't, and she was done with that particular form of self-deception. She thought about it honestly, measuring it against what she knew about Roman, about how he operated, about the specific language of his actions. Roman Blackwell, she said slowly, has never in his adult life had access to something he needed and not used it. Not once. He doesn't leave resources on the table. It's not in his nature. She looked at her mug, except he just did. Ruth was quiet. "That's not crisis management," Nora said. "That's not strategy. If it were strategy, he would have used the address and framed the approach as romantic, shown up with the letter in person, and counted on the gesture to overwhelm the violation." She looked up. "He didn't do that. He left the file closed and asked Daniel to ask me. He put it in my hands." "So what does that mean?" Ruth asked again. "It means," Nora said carefully, "that he's learning the difference between controlling a situation and respecting a person. And that is the single thing I needed to see before I could believe any of the rest of it was real." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to see him." Ruth looked at her steadily. "You're sure?" "No," Nora said. "But I'm sure enough, and I'm not going back to that house. I'm not going back to anything that existed before. If this happens, it happens on entirely new ground." She put both hands flat on the table. "And he comes to me. I don't go to him." Ruth nodded slowly. "I'll set it up through Daniel." "One more thing," Nora said. "I want Ruth present. Not in the room, but in the house. I need to know that if the conversation becomes something I can't manage, I'm not alone." "I'll be here," Ruth said simply. Nora nodded. She picked up her pen, and she made the 24th mark in the notebook. The baby moved again almost immediately, as if confirming something. She allowed herself for the first time in 6 days to feel the full, complicated weight of what she still felt for Roman Blackwell, which was not simple, had never been simple, and was not going to resolve itself into something clean and easy just because the situation had reached a turning point. She loved him. She had loved him since the library floor. She had never stopped, not through any of it, not even on the worst nights. But love, she had learned, was not the question. The question was always what love required you to do. And what it had required her to do was leave. And what it might require her to do next was something she was not yet willing to name. She went to her appointment with Dr. Harmon at 2 o'clock. The baby was 36 weeks. Healthy weight, healthy heart rate, positioned correctly. Dr. Harmon, who had delivered roughly 900 babies over 3 decades and had the unshakable calm of someone who had seen every possible version of the human arrival story, told her she was doing well and that she should expect to meet her daughter within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Her daughter. Nora sat in the car afterward and said the word quietly to herself. Daughter. She thought about what kind of world she was going to hand this person. What the first lessons were going to be, not the ones you intend to teach, but the ones children absorb from watching the adults around them navigate their own lives. She thought about what she wanted her daughter to understand about love, that it was real, that it was worth pursuing, that it could also cost you things you did not know you had until you felt them being taken. She thought about what she wanted her daughter to understand about leaving, that sometimes leaving is the most loving thing you can do. For yourself. And for the person you leave if they are capable of using the absence to understand what they had. She drove back to Ruth's house. She called Daniel. Tell him Saturday, she said. 11 in the morning, Ruth's address. He comes alone. No Donovan, no Marcus, no security. Alone. A brief pause. I'll tell him. She hung up. She had 4 days. She used them. She slept. Actually slept the way she had not been sleeping for weeks before she left the bone-deep sleep of a woman who had finally put down something she had been carrying for too long. She ate properly. She talked to Ruth in the evenings, long, unhurried conversations about all manner of things, because Ruth was the kind of person who knew that sometimes what a person in crisis needs is not to talk about the crisis at all, but to remember that they exist outside of it. She wrote. Not a letter. Just her own thoughts in the journal she had kept since college, the kind of writing that was never meant for anyone else's eyes. She wrote about what she wanted, not from Roman, from her own life in its entirety. She wrote about teaching which she missed with a specificity that surprised her particular students, particular moments, the specific satisfaction of watching a child's face change when something landed. She wrote about what kind of mother she intended to be. She wrote about what would have to be true concretely, and without sentimentality for her to consider rebuilding anything with Roman. She wrote that list carefully. She did not compromise any item on it. On Friday evening, Ruth sat across from her and said, How are you feeling, honestly? Scared, Nora said, and ready, both at the same time. That's the right combination, Ruth said. On Saturday morning, Roman left Chicago at 7:45. He drove himself, which he had not done for a significant occasion in years. He did not bring anyone. He had told Donovan where he was going, not the exact address, but the general direction and the purpose. Because disappearing entirely would have created operational problems, he did not have the bandwidth to manage. But he had made clear that this was personal, that it was entirely outside the organization's concern, and that no one was to contact him unless there was a genuine emergency. He drove through the gray December morning with the letter in his jacket pocket and the radio off. He thought about what he was going to say. Then he stopped trying to plan it. He had spent 37 years planning every significant conversation before he had it, and he was beginning to understand that this habit, while professionally useful, had contributed meaningfully to the emotional distance Nora had described in her letter. Planning a conversation was a way of controlling it, and controlling it was a way of ensuring that it never fully arrived, that it stayed at the level of managed exchange rather than becoming something real. He was not going to plan this one. He was going to drive to Michigan and walk into a house where his pregnant wife was waiting for him, and he was going to say what was true without the architecture of strategy around it, and whatever happened after that was going to happen. He arrived at Ruth's address at 10:58. He sat in the car for 2 minutes. Then he got out. Ruth answered the door. She was 63 years old, and she looked at him with the completely unintimidated directness of a woman who had spent 40 years doing difficult things and was not remotely impressed by powerful men. "Mr. Blackwell," she said. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. She studied him for a moment. "She's in the kitchen," she said. "I'll be upstairs. You have the same amount of time you need, and not 1 second more than she wants to give you. Clear." "Clear," he said. Ruth stepped aside. He walked in. He found the kitchen. Nora was standing at the counter with a cup of tea in both hands. She was 8.5 months pregnant, and she was wearing a gray sweater and her hair was down. And she looked at him when he came through the door with an expression that was completely unreadable. Not cold, not warm, not any of the things he might have anticipated. Just present, fully present. Looking at him without any of the careful management she had practiced for 3 years inside his house. He stopped in the doorway. They looked at each other for a long moment. "Hi," she said, simply. "Hi," he said. He did not move toward her. He waited. She set her tea down. She pulled out a chair at the table and sat down. She gestured at the chair across from her. He sat. They were 4 feet apart, the closest they had been in 6 days. The distance felt enormous and also somehow smaller than the distance that had existed between them in the same bed 3 weeks ago. "You didn't open the file," she said. "No." "Why?" He thought about giving her the strategic answer about how approaching her without consent would have confirmed every reason she had to leave. Then he put that answer aside. "Because finding you without your permission would have been one more thing I did to you instead of for you," he said. "And I've done enough of those." Nora looked at him carefully. "That's a good answer," she said. "Is it the true one?" "Yes," he said. "It's also the true one." She nodded slowly. "Tell me what you know, about what happened, about your mother." He told her everything, not the managed version, not the version that positioned him most favorably. He told her the timeline of what Evelyn had built the conversations with Caruso, the staged dinner Jade Mercer's statement, the shell accounts, all of it. He told her what he had done in response, the restructuring the confrontation with his mother, the meeting with Caruso, what Sylvia Park was building at the legal level. He told her about sitting in Father Cahill's back room for 22 minutes without his phone. At that, something shifted very slightly in her expression. "And Daniel," she said. "I told Donovan to leave him alone," Roman said. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. He made sure you were safe when I wasn't doing it. That's not something I'm going to punish." Nora looked at her hands. "Your mother told you I was asking questions about the Meridian account." Roman went very still. "Yes." "I was," Nora said. "I need you to understand why." She looked up at him directly. "I wasn't building a case against you. I wasn't gathering ammunition. I was trying to understand the full shape of what I was living inside because I had a baby coming and I needed to know what world I was bringing her into. I needed to know what the real risks were." She paused. "That's not betrayal. That's a mother doing what mothers do." "I know," Roman said. "Does that change how you—" "It doesn't change anything," he said, "except that it makes me angrier at my mother for framing it as a threat, because she knew what it actually was. She knew and she chose to use it." Nora nodded. They were quiet for a moment. Then Roman reached into his jacket pocket and took out the letter. He set it on the table between them. He did not push it toward her. He left it in the middle. "You don't have to read it now," he said. "You can read it later, or not at all, but I needed to give it to you in person because I needed you to see that I wrote it, that it's real." Nora looked at the letter, at her name on the front in his handwriting, precise and controlled even under pressure, the way everything about Roman was precise and controlled, except that she could see even from across the table that the pen had pressed harder in certain places, that there were words he had crossed out and rewritten, that the envelope had been folded and unfolded more than once. She picked it up. She held it for a moment. She did not open it. "I have a list," she said, "things that would have to be true before I could consider rebuilding anything, not requests, requirements." "Tell me," he said. She told him. She went through every item with the calm, measured precision of a woman who had spent 4 days making sure she was not asking for more than was real or settling for less than was necessary. She talked about transparency, not access to his operations, but honesty about what was happening around her so she could make informed decisions about her own life. She talked about presence, actual physical, consistent presence, the kind that could not be replaced by proxies and delegated communications. She talked about his mother, not estrangement. She was not asking for that, but a clear and enforced boundary between Evelyn's authority and their household permanently. She talked about herself, about teaching, about the fact that she was not willing to disappear into the shape of a Blackwell wife, that she had a life and a profession and an identity that existed before Roman and would exist regardless of what they decided now, and that whatever they built going forward would have to accommodate that reality rather than absorb it. Roman listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I can meet every one of those." "I know you believe that," she said. "Believing it isn't the same as doing it." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. You're going to have to watch me do it over time and decide for yourself whether I'm actually doing it or just performing it." "That's right," she said. "And I need you to understand that I am going to watch very carefully. I am not going to give you the benefit of the doubt the way I used to. I gave you 3 years of benefit of the doubt, and it cost me things I'm still calculating." "I understand," he said. "And the baby," Nora said. Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but into a register that was more internal, more real. "She is my first priority. Before everything else, before the marriage, before the family, before anything your world requires, she comes first, always." "She should," Roman said. And then, because it was true, and because he was trying to stop editing the true things before they reached the surface, "I want the chance to put her first too. That's what I want, Nora, more than anything I've wanted in a very long time." Nora looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the library across a row of picture books, directly, without fear, without any of the social lubrication that usually cushioned difficult assessments of difficult people. She looked at him for a long time. Then she opened the letter. She read it there at the table with him sitting across from her. She did not read it quickly. She read every word, and he watched her face not to manage her reaction, but because he had no idea what she was going to feel, and he was done pretending that her feelings were secondary data. When she finished, she folded it carefully. She held it in both hands for a moment. "You crossed out 'I promise' 3 times, she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I didn't want to make a promise in a letter," he said. "I wanted to make it in person where you could see my face." She looked at him. "Then make it," she said. He held her gaze. "I promise," he said, "that I will show up every day in the ways that matter. Not perfectly. I'm not going to be perfect, but I am going to show up. And when I fail, because I will fail, sometimes I promise to say so directly instead of disappearing into the business and hoping you don't notice." He paused. "That's what I have. It's real, and it's not enough on its own, but it's what I can promise honestly." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up. She walked around this table. She stood in front of him and she looked down at him in the chair, and for a moment it was the library again, the floor again, the fundamental rearrangement of who was up and who was down, who had power and who was choosing to set it aside, and she put one hand on his face. He reached up and covered her hand with his. Neither of them said anything. The baby moved that slow, deliberate knock from the inside that Nora had described once on one of the last good evenings they'd had as feeling like someone reminding you they were there. Roman felt it under his palm. He closed his eyes for 1 second. "Hi," he said quietly. Not to Nora this time. Nora's breath caught. She sat down beside him, not across from him, and she let him keep his hand where it was, and they stayed like that in Ruth's kitchen in the December quiet of a small town in Michigan, two people who had broken something important and were choosing with full knowledge of the cost to try to rebuild it on entirely different ground. Not the ground of his empire, not the ground of his mother's design, not the ground of what the Blackwell name required, or the city of Chicago expected, or the version of their marriage that had existed before the night everything broke. New ground, the only kind worth building on. 6 weeks later, in a hospital in Kalamazoo, a girl was born. She arrived at 4:17 in the morning, which was early even by her own projected schedule, which Nora said later was the first indication that she was going to do things on her own timeline, regardless of what anyone else had planned. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. She had Nora's eyes and a determination in her expression that Roman recognized with a feeling too large and complicated to name as belonging entirely to her mother. Roman was there. He had driven to Michigan 8 days earlier when Nora called and said simply, "I think it's getting close," and he had come without being asked twice, and he had been present in every way that mattered, not managing, not organizing, not delegating, simply there. He held his daughter for the first time at 4:31 in the morning. She was extraordinarily small and extraordinarily certain of herself, even in the first minutes of existing in the world, and Roman Blackwell, who had never once in his adult life been in a situation he did not know how to handle, had absolutely no idea what to do with how completely undone he was by 14 minutes of knowing her. He looked at Nora. She was watching him from the bed, exhausted and precise and entirely herself. "What do you think?" she said. He looked at the baby. He looked at Nora. He thought about the library, about the letter on the pillow, about the grocery list on the notepad, and the file he had not opened, and the chair that was too small for him, and the 22 minutes without his phone, and everything it had cost them both to arrive at this room at 4:31 in the morning in a hospital in Michigan. "I think," he said slowly, "that I almost missed this." Nora held his gaze. "You didn't," she said. And that was true. He hadn't. Not because of luck, not because the city had been merciful, not because the empire had allowed it. He hadn't missed it because one woman had decided that leaving was the only way to make arriving possible. Because she had written a letter that told the truth when silence would have been easier. Because she had chosen herself, and in doing so, had given him the only real chance he was ever going to get to choose differently. He hadn't missed it. And he was going to spend every day from this one forward making sure he understood exactly what that meant. Some things break in order to become what they were always supposed to be, and some silences when they finally end are louder than anything that came before them.